The letter from the solicitor arrived on a Thursday morning, which was when Marguerite learned that Thornfield House had been sold. Not from Aldric. Not through any conversation, any warning, any acknowledgement that the house existed, or that its existence had ever mattered to anyone. Through a letter from Fitch, the Pemberton family solicitor, the Aldric Pemberton family solicitor, whose professional obligation was to the Duke and not to the Duchess, and who had therefore written with the smooth, formal apology of a man delivering news he considers someone else's responsibility to have delivered first. The letter said that Thornfield House in Somerset, the property registered in the name of the Cavendish estate and transferred to the Pemberton family at the time of the marriage settlement, had been sold to a Mr. Arthur Voss of Bristol on the 2nd of the month. The sale had been completed through the family solicitor's office. The proceeds had been applied to the Pemberton estate's outstanding debt with the Alderton banking concern. The sale was complete and binding. The letter was dated 3 days ago. Thornfield House had already been gone for 3 days when Marguerite read about it. She put the letter on the breakfast table. She picked up her tea. She drank it. The thing about Thornfield House was not that it was valuable. It was not particularly valuable as Somerset properties of its size went, which was perhaps why Aldric had selected it as the thing to sell rather than one of the Pemberton estate's own satellite properties, none of which he wished to reduce. The thing about Thornfield House was that Marguerite had been born in it. She had learned to walk in its entrance hall and to read in its library, and to identify the names of the birds in its garden from the specific window seat in the east sitting room that caught the morning light, and from which the rose garden was visible, and from which, on very clear days, the edge of the Somerset hills appeared as a blue-grey line against the sky. Her mother had died in it. That was also a thing about Thornfield House. Her mother had died in the room at the top of the eastern staircase, in the summer of the year before Marguerite's marriage, in a way that was slow and attended and surrounded by everything that had constituted her world, the familiar furniture, the familiar light, the familiar sound of the Somerset garden in August, which was the sound of bees and the particular quality of afternoon quiet that only old gardens produced. She had died with Marguerite holding one hand and the family housekeeper, Mrs. Aldred, holding the other, and it had been, in the way that deaths sometimes were, the right death in the right place, which was a thing Marguerite knew did not exist, and which had existed anyway. And now it belonged to Mr. Arthur Voss of Bristol. She finished her tea. She set the cup down. She looked at the breakfast-room window, which faced the Pemberton estate's east gardens, which were very good gardens, and which she had nothing against, and which were not what she was looking at. She was looking at the letter. She was thinking about 3 things simultaneously, which was a skill she had developed across 6 years of marriage to a man whose decisions regularly required her to think about several things simultaneously. The first thing was the marriage settlement. The specific terms of the marriage settlement as she understood them, which was the understanding of a woman who had read every document her father's solicitor had put in front of her before signing it, and who had then read each document again to confirm her understanding was correct. The second thing was her father. The third thing was Webb. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Marguerite read that her childhood home had been sold 3 days ago without her knowledge, and then finished her tea and thought about 3 things simultaneously. What does that tell you about who she was, and what do you think those 3 things were telling her? Her father, Charles Cavendish, was 69 and had been running the Cavendish banking concern since he was 24, which was 45 years, and had the specific quality of a man who has watched money move through the English economy for 45 years, and who therefore understood both the surface of financial transactions and the geography beneath them. He had not been pleased about the marriage. He had not been unpleased about Aldric specifically. Aldric was a duke, which was the correct category, and he was not a cruel man, which was the minimum acceptable standard, and the Pemberton estate was large and well managed, and the social position it offered Marguerite was appropriate to the ambitions the Cavendish family had always held for their only daughter. He had not been unpleased about any of these things. He had been unpleased about the debt. The Pemberton estate, When Marguerite's father's banking concern had conducted the review that Charles Cavendish conducted of any situation his daughter was about to commit herself to, was carrying a debt load that was significant relative to its income, not catastrophic, not the debt of a man who had failed to manage his inheritance, but the debt of a man who had managed it at the level of someone who had always believed that income would eventually catch up to expenditure, and who had been, through a combination of agricultural yield and careful social management, just barely correct about this. The just barely was what worried Charles. He had told Marguerite in the conversation that preceded the formal agreement that the just barely was not the marriage's strength, and that she should understand it clearly before she decided. She had understood it clearly and had decided anyway, because Aldric was, she had found him, across the season of their courtship, a man she trusted. Not loved, not yet, which was what made the trust more significant. She had seen in him the quality of someone who meant what he said, and who managed difficult situations by confronting them rather than managing around them, and she had believed that this quality would extend to their marriage. She had been mostly right about this quality for 5 years. In the 6th year, the quality had encountered a financial situation that was larger than Aldric's management strategy could accommodate, and his response had been to sell the one asset he thought he could sell without telling her, because he did not wish to have the conversation that would have preceded the telling. The asset had not been his to sell without the conversation. The marriage settlement, the document she had read and then read again, contained a clause that her father's solicitor had insisted on, and that Aldric's solicitor had apparently considered a formality. The clause specified that assets transferred from the Cavendish estate at the time of the marriage, including Thornfield House, could not be disposed of without the written consent of both parties to the marriage. Aldric had not obtained her written consent. Fitch, apparently, had not flagged this as a concern. This was the first thing. The second thing was her father, which was specifically the conversation she needed to have with him today and what she needed to ask him, which was the same question she had asked him 2 years ago when she had first understood the shape of the financial situation, and to which he had given her an answer that she had filed away in the understanding that it might be needed. The third thing was Webb, who was her solicitor, her father's solicitor originally, and then hers, because her father had understood that she needed her own, and not the Pemberton family's, and who had the documentation and the position and the understanding of the marriage settlement that the next several hours were going to require. She got up from the breakfast table. She went to the morning room, which was where she worked and where the correspondence desk was, and she wrote 2 letters. The first was to Webb. 4 sentences. The marriage settlement clause. The sale of Thornfield House. The absence of her written consent. His availability today. The second was to her father. 3 sentences. She knew about the sale. She needed to speak with him. She was coming to London. She sent both letters by the morning express, and then she went to speak to the housekeeper about a carriage for the 11 o'clock train. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Marguerite learned that her childhood home had been sold in violation of her marriage settlement, and wrote 2 letters and arranged a train to London. She did not go to find Aldric. She did not cry. She did not wait. What does that choice tell you about how long she had been thinking about this possibility? The answer was 2 years. 2 years ago, in the 4th year of the marriage, Marguerite had been reviewing the Pemberton estate accounts, a task she had taken on in the 2nd year, and which Aldric had initially resisted and subsequently accepted as a condition of the organised functioning of the estate. And she had identified the shape of the debt problem clearly enough to understand that it was going to require a solution that the estate's ordinary income could not provide. She had brought this to Aldric. He had received it with the expression of a man who has been carrying information and is being confronted with the evidence that someone else has found it. And he had said what men of his character said when confronted with this, that it was being managed, that the agricultural yields were expected to improve, that the Alderton banking concern had agreed to reasonable terms, that there was no cause for immediate concern. She had said, "There is cause for considered planning." He had agreed that considered planning was appropriate and had not done any. She had done the considered planning herself, which was what had happened with most things in the Pemberton household that required considered planning. The considered planning had included a conversation with her father in November of that year, at his London office, about the Pemberton estate's financial position and what her position within it would be if the financial position deteriorated. Her father had listened and had then said, in the way he said things that were both true and useful, "The marriage settlement has teeth. Your solicitor should understand them. The question is what you want to use them for." She had said, "For now, nothing, but I want to understand them." He had told her. She had filed the understanding. She had also, in the months following that conversation, had a series of discussions with Webb about the Cavendish family trust, the trust that her father had established at the time of her birth, and which was distinct from her marriage dowry, and which held assets that were hers independently of the marriage. The trust was not large, but it was hers, and it was documented, and it was managed by Webb, with the organized care of a man who understood that the trust's value was not primarily in its current size, but in its legal independence, and in its capacity to serve as the vehicle for additional assets, if and when those assets needed to move through a structure that answered to Marguerite, rather than to the Pemberton estate. In the 2 years since that conversation, Marguerite had been quietly building the trust's capacity. Not dramatically, not in the way of a woman who has made a decision and is implementing it with visible intent. In the way of a woman who understands that organized preparation is what makes the difference between being in a position to act and not being in a position to act, and who has always preferred to be in a position. She had also, in those 2 years, been paying close attention to the Pemberton estate's debt instruments, the specific instruments, their holders, their terms, the conditions under which they could be transferred. She had learned, in the first of those 2 years, that the estate's primary debt instrument, the largest single obligation, the one that represented the backbone of the debt load her husband had been managing with insufficient urgency, was held by a private lending house in Edinburgh called Meridian Capital. She had learned in the second year through her father's banking network that Meridian Capital was experiencing its own financial difficulties and was looking to consolidate its portfolio. She had told her father. He had said, "Do you want us to look at it?" She had said, "Not yet, but keep watching." He had kept watching. In London, on the Thursday afternoon following the Thursday morning of Fitch's letter, Marguerite sat in her father's office on Threadneedle Street and listened to him tell her what he had been watching for 6 months. The office was the same office he had worked in for 40 years, the same dark panelling, the same view of the street below, the same maps on the wall with their network of banking relationships annotated in her father's hand. The same quality of light, which was the light of a room that took the work it housed seriously and had arranged itself accordingly. "Meridian is ready," her father said. He was a man of few words in professional contexts, which was one of the reasons 45 years of banking had produced the outcomes it had. "They have been ready for 3 months. I have been waiting for you." "What is the instrument?" she said. He told her. The Pemberton estate's primary debt instrument, a mortgage-style obligation on the estate's primary income-generating properties, the central farms of the Pemberton landholding, was valued at the figure she had known it was valued at, which was the figure that had produced the just barely concern in her father when he had reviewed the estate before the marriage. "The price Meridian will accept," she said. He told her. The price was favourable. The price was the price of a lender who needs liquidity and is willing to accept less than the instrument's face value in order to achieve that liquidity quickly. She did her arithmetic. The Cavendish family trust's reserve, combined with the proceeds from 3 of the trust's smaller investments that Webb had been managing for exactly this kind of deployment, was sufficient to cover the price. It would deplete the trust significantly. It would also, when the purchase was complete, make Marguerite Cavendish Pemberton, Duchess of Ashmore, the holder of the primary debt instrument on her husband's estate, which meant she would be the entity to which the Pemberton estate owed its most significant financial obligation. "How quickly can it be done?" she said. "Today," her father said. "If you want it done today." She thought about Thornfield House, about Mr. Arthur Voss of Bristol, about the east sitting-room window and the morning light and the rose garden. "Today," she said. "Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments." Marguerite had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. Her father had been watching Meridian Capital for 6 months. The trust was ready. The price was acceptable. And she said, "Today. Not tomorrow. Not after more consideration. Today." What do you think the sale of Thornfield House meant to her beyond the house itself? The transaction took 4 hours. This was faster than most transactions of comparable complexity, which was the result of 2 factors: Meridian Capital's eagerness to complete the consolidation and receive the liquidity it needed, and the Cavendish banking concern's 45 years of experience in completing transactions of this kind with the minimum of unnecessary process. Webb was in the office by 2 o'clock with the relevant documentation. The Cavendish Family Trust's purchasing vehicle, a company called Ashwood Holdings, which Webb had incorporated 6 months ago when the Meridian situation had first appeared on the horizon and which had been sitting dormant in the trust's structure waiting for this, was ready to receive the instrument. The instrument was transferred. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Ashwood Holdings held the Pemberton estate's primary debt instrument. Ashwood Holdings answered to the Cavendish Family Trust. The Cavendish Family Trust answered to Marguerite. Her father poured 2 glasses of the specific Scotch whisky that he kept in the lower drawer of his desk for occasions that warranted it. He handed one to Marguerite. "To your mother," he said, who would have found this entire situation both outrageous and satisfying in equal parts. "She would have," Marguerite agreed. She drank. The whisky was good. "What now?" her father said. "Now I go home," she said. "And Aldric?" "And Aldric," she said, "learns something today." She arrived back at Pemberton Hall at 8 o'clock that evening. The hall was lit in the way it was lit when Aldric was home and receiving the entrance hall lamps, the drawing-room windows, the sound from within of a house that was occupied and managed. She had telegraphed from London to say she was returning, which was not a warning but was a courtesy. She went to the drawing-room. Aldric was there, with a glass of brandy and the expression of a man who has been waiting for something and has been managing the waiting in the way available to him, which was brandy and the fire. He stood when she came in. "You were in London?" he said. "Yes," she said. She sat in the chair across from his. "I received Fitch's letter this morning." Something moved across his expression. "I was going to tell you." "You were going to tell me that Thornfield House had been sold," she said. "After it had been sold, which is a different kind of telling." She looked at him steadily. "Aldric, we are not going to have the argument about Thornfield tonight. The argument about Thornfield will happen, and I am going to be very clear about what happened and why it was wrong, but that is not tonight's conversation." He looked at her. "What is tonight's conversation?" She looked at the fire for a moment. She thought about how to begin, which was not a question of courage. She had never found these conversations difficult in the way that people who avoided them found them difficult. She found them requiring of clarity, which was a different quality. "I want to tell you about Ashwood Holdings," she said. He looked at her. "I don't know what that is," he said. "It's a company," she said. "Incorporated in the spring, it holds one asset, the Pemberton estate's primary debt instrument, which was previously held by Meridian Capital in Edinburgh." The brandy glass stayed where it was, halfway between his hand and the table. "The Meridian instrument," he said slowly. "Yes," she said. "Meridian sold it?" "This afternoon," she said. "Ashwood Holdings is a purchasing vehicle of the Cavendish Family Trust, which is my trust, which I hold independently of this marriage." The glass went to the table. He looked at her with the expression of a man whose understanding of the evening he had been anticipating is being reorganized in real time. "You own the instrument," he said. "My trust holds it through Ashwood," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. The fire was doing what fires did, going on, consuming what it had, throwing heat into the room regardless of what the people in the room were managing. "When did you?" he started. "I have been watching Meridian's situation for 6 months," she said. "My father has been watching it for longer. The opportunity was there, which is why I took it today." "Today?" he said. "The day you received Fitch's letter?" "Yes," she said. He looked at his hands. She waited because the situation required him to arrive at his own understanding rather than being delivered to it. And she had always found that the delivered understanding was less durable than the arrived at one. "What do you want?" he said, which was the question that these conversations eventually produced. "Several things," she said, in order of importance. "The first is the marriage settlement violation. Thornfield House was sold without my written consent, which is required by the settlement's terms. Webb will be in contact with Fitch about the legal implications. The sale cannot be undone because Mr. Voss has already taken possession, but the financial proceeds from the sale, which were applied to the Alderton banking concern debt, are subject to the settlement's compensation clause. You owe me the equivalent of Thornfield's market value." He was calculating. She let him calculate. "The second thing," she said, "is the debt management. The Meridian instrument is now held by my trust. The trust will continue to service it on the original terms. The repayment schedule does not change. The interest rate does not change. Nothing changes about the instrument's practical effect on the estate except who holds it." She paused. "But I want a seat at the table when decisions about the estate's financial management are made. Not as a courtesy, as a formal participant. Webb will draft the terms." "A formal participant," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have been reviewing the estate accounts for 4 years and managing the household's financial planning for 6. I have been doing this informally. I want it formalized." He looked at her. "And the third?" he said. She looked at him. "The third thing is a conversation that I want us to have about Thornfield," she said, and her voice was very even, which was the voice she used when she was managing something that was not easy to manage. "Not about the legal situation and not about the debt. About the house. About why you chose it. About whether you understood what it was and decided it was the acceptable loss anyway, or whether you did not understand what it was, which is its own kind of accounting." He looked at the fire. She waited. "I understood what it was," he said. "That's the honest answer. I understood it, and I chose it anyway because the alternative was the North Farms and the North Farms tenants. I couldn't." He stopped. "The North Farms house 12 tenant families who have been on the land for generations. I couldn't sell what they depend on." She looked at him. "You chose between the families on the North Farms," she said slowly, "and my mother's house." "Yes," he said. "That's what I chose between." She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the North Farms, which she knew. She had visited 3 of them in the past 2 years as part of her estate account review, and she knew the names of the families, which were the Hendersons, and the Webb family, and the Alderton tenants, and the 9 others. She was thinking about what it would mean to those families if the farms were sold. She was also thinking about the east sitting room window. "You should have told me," she said. "That was the choice you needed to bring to me, not to resolve yourself. The choice you described, between the North Farm families and Thornfield, is a choice that required both of us because both of us had stakes in both options." "I know," he said. "I knew it then. I made the decision I could make alone because the decision I needed to make with you required telling you about the depth of the debt situation, which I had been managing by not telling you about it." "I knew about the depth of the debt situation," she said. "I have known for 2 years. He looked at her. "The estate accounts," he said. "Yes," she said. I am not angry that you tried to protect the North Farm families. I am angry that you believed the protection required hiding the situation from me, which means you believed that hiding it from me was easier than trusting me with it. She looked at him steadily. I have been your partner in the management of this estate for 6 years. I have been doing it without acknowledgement and without formal standing. If you had trusted me with it 2 years ago, we would have found a third option that preserved both the North Farms and Thornfield. He looked at her with the expression she had seen before, the expression of a man who is being shown a version of events that is accurate and that he wishes had been available to him at the time. Was there a third option? He said. My father was watching Meridian for 6 months, she said. If I had known the full picture 2 years ago, I would have engaged him earlier. Meridian's willingness to sell at a favourable price is a function of their own difficulties, which have been building for 3 years. 2 years ago the price would have been lower. 2 years ago we might have had the capital in the trust to purchase the instrument, or to use it as collateral for a restructuring that addressed the Alderton debt differently. She paused. I don't know with certainty that there was a third option, but I know that we had 2 more years than we used to look for one. He looked at his hands. He looked at the fire. He looked at her. The formal participation, he said. The estate financial management. You want this going forward? Yes, she said. Webb drafts the terms. Webb drafts the terms, she agreed. Fitch reviews them. You and I agree to them. They become part of the operating arrangement of this household and this estate. He was quiet for a long moment. The Meridian instrument, he said. The repayment schedule. If it's unchanged, the estate doesn't experience any immediate financial pressure. Correct, she said. The instrument simply has a different holder. The estate's obligations are unchanged. But if the estate were ever to default on the repayment, then the instrument's holder would have the rights specified in the original agreement, she said. Which are the rights that Meridian would have had? Which are not rights that I intend to exercise, because the purpose of holding the instrument is not to have a weapon against this estate. It is to have a formal position in this estate's financial architecture that reflects the actual position I have occupied for 6 years.
He looked at her for a long time. She returned the look with the steady, organized attention she brought to most things. You could have used this differently, he said. You could have. The instrument is significant. If you had wanted to, you could have used it to force a much more substantial position. Yes, she said. Why didn't you? She thought about this. Because I am not trying to punish you, she said. I am trying to correct a structural problem in how this marriage operates. The structural problem is that I have been managing things without standing. The correction is to give me standing. That is what I need from this, not punishment. She paused. And because the estate is not just yours and mine, it is the North Farm families and the household staff and the tenant farmers and the community this house has been part of for 200 years. I am not going to use this instrument in a way that damages those people's security to make a point about my own. He looked at the fire. I sold your mother's house, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. I should have told you. Yes, she said. And if I had told you, we would have found another way, she said. Whether we found it or not, I cannot know with certainty, but we would have looked for it together, and looking together is what this marriage was supposed to be. He was quiet for a long time. The fire went on. The hall was quiet in the specific way of a large house at 9 in the evening, the domestic sounds of the household completing its day's work, the distant sound of the kitchen settling, the clock in the hallway counting its way through the hour. Webb and Fitch, he said finally. When? Webb will contact Fitch tomorrow, she said. The settlement compensation for Thornfield first, the formal participation documentation second. Webb has the framework ready. He's been drafting it for several months. He almost said something about the several months, the recognition that she had been preparing this for longer than today, and decided not to, because the recognition did not require saying, and saying it would have added weight to a room that had enough weight already. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "The North Farm families," she said. "I want to meet with all 12 in the spring, not as an inspection, as an introduction, properly done. I should know who they are and what they need and what the estate can do better for them. If we are going to be managing this estate together going forward, I need to understand it fully, which means the people on it as well as the accounts." "I'll arrange it," he said. "We'll arrange it," she said. "Together." Something in his expression shifted. Not the dramatic shift of a man who has seen the light. He was not that kind of man, and she did not want that kind of shift, which was too much like a performance. It was the smaller shift of a man who has received accurate information about a situation he has been mismanaging, and who has decided that the accurate information is the better basis for proceeding. "The whiskey," he said. "Will you have a glass?" "Yes," she said, "but not the drawing-room whiskey. The good one. The one you keep for when things are significant." He looked at her. "You know about the good whiskey," he said. "I have been running this household for 6 years," she said. "I know where everything is." He almost smiled. He went to find the good whiskey, which was in the study where he kept it, and came back with 2 glasses. He handed her one. She looked at the glass. "To Thornfield," she said, "which is gone. And to my mother, who would have found this entire situation both outrageous and satisfying in equal parts." He looked at her. "She would have found it satisfying?" he said. "She was a woman who believed that situations resolved themselves in the end," Marguerite said. "She was usually right." He sat across from her with his glass. "The Meridian instrument," he said. "The price you paid. The trust. It's significantly reduced." "Temporarily," she said. "The repayment proceeds will rebuild it over the instrument's term. Webb has the projections. And the Thornfield compensation, when I pay it, goes to the trust as well," she said, "which will accelerate the rebuilding." He looked at her with the expression she had been reading across 6 years, the expression of a man encountering the full scope of what his wife had been doing, while he had been managing things at one level and she had been managing them at another. "You have been planning this for 2 years," he said. "I have been preparing for a range of circumstances for 2 years," she said. "The specific circumstance that materialized today was the one that required using the preparation. I did not know when it would materialize or what form it would take. But you knew something would. I knew that the debt situation was going to require a resolution that the estate's income alone could not provide," she said. "And I knew that the resolution was going to involve assets and decisions that affected me, and I knew that I needed to be in a position to participate in those decisions when they arrived." She looked at him. "Which is what I have been trying to tell you for 2 years." He looked at his glass. "I know," he said. "I was not listening at the level I should have been." "No," she agreed, "you weren't. I am listening now." "Yes," she said, "you are." The fire went on. They sat with the good whiskey and the weight of the day and the specific quality of quiet that settles over 2 people who have had a difficult conversation and have arrived at something like solid ground. Outside, the Pemberton estate continued its nighttime life, the kitchen garden dark and winter bare, the north farms beyond the estate's boundary where the 12 families were completing their own evening routines, the east gardens where the roses were dormant under the February cold. Inside, 2 people sat with a fire and 2 glasses, and a beginning. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Marguerite and Aldric sat with the good whiskey after a conversation that had reorganized the estate's financial architecture and the marriage's operating arrangement simultaneously. She toasted Thornfield and her mother. He was listening, finally, at the level he should have been listening at before. What do you think the next year of that marriage looked like? It looked like work, which was, Marguerite had always thought, the honest description of what a functioning marriage between 2 people who took things seriously was. Not the romantic version, not the performed version, the actual version, which was the version of two people who have agreed on something and are implementing the agreement and discovering, in the implementation, what the agreement means. The implementation began immediately. Webb met with Fitch in the first week of March. The meeting was, by Webb's account, conducted with the professional efficiency of two solicitors who have been given clear instructions by their respective clients and who are implementing those instructions without resistance, which was the efficiency that occurred when both parties had already decided what was reasonable and did not require the meeting to produce that decision. The settlement compensation for Thornfield was agreed at the market valuation, which was the figure Webb had prepared and which Fitch had accepted after a single counter that was declined and not revisited. The formal participation documentation took 3 weeks to draft and 2 days to agree. The document established Marguerite's role in the estate's financial management not as a veto authority over every decision, which would have been impractical and which she had not asked for, but as a required participant in decisions that affected the estate's structural financial position, the disposition of assets, the management of debt, the terms of significant contracts, and the negotiation of significant obligations. It also established a quarterly review meeting at which the estate's financial accounts were presented to both Aldric and Marguerite jointly, with Webb attending in an advisory capacity. The first quarterly review was in April. Marguerite came to it with the 4 years of estate account reviews she had been conducting informally, organized into the format she had developed, and which presented the estate's financial position in the clear, analytical structure that she had found most useful. Aldric came to it having apparently spent the intervening weeks reading the same accounts with more attention than he had previously brought to them. Webb attended with the instrument's repayment schedule and the trust's projected rebuilding timeline and the Thornfield compensation receipt. The meeting took 4 hours. At the end of it, the three of them had a clearer picture of the Pemberton estate's financial position than the estate had had in at least 10 years, which was how long it had been since anyone had reviewed the accounts with the combined attention of two people who were both invested in the outcome and a solicitor who had no interest in reassuring anyone. The picture had problems. Some of them were solvable in the near term. Some required patience. All of them were documented. The East Farms drainage situation, Marguerite said near the end of the meeting. This has been producing below the yield projection for 3 years. The drainage survey from the county board is in the file. I commissioned it in February. The conclusion is that the east drainage channel needs significant maintenance work. The cost is in the survey. Aldric read the survey. He looked at the cost. This is manageable if we defer the south wall restoration, he said. The south wall restoration was deferred last year, she said. If we defer it again, we risk it becoming an emergency repair, which is more expensive. The survey is in the file on that as well. He looked at the 2 surveys. He looked at Webb. Is there a sequencing that works? He said. Webb had the projections. They spent an hour on the sequencing. By the end of the hour they had a plan. It was, Marguerite noted, a better plan than either of them would have produced alone. Aldric knew things about the south wall's specific structural situation that she had not known. She knew things about the east drainage channel's connection to the tenant farmers' planting schedules that had not appeared in the formal accounts. The plan was the product of both. In May, they went to the North Farms together, all 12 across 3 days, in the practical country clothes that farm visits required, rather than the formal visiting clothes that social conventions suggested. Marguerite knew several of the families already from her own previous visits. She was introduced to the others as the Duchess and as the estate's co-manager of its financial affairs, which was the title they had agreed was accurate and which she used consistently. The Henderson family, the largest operation on the north boundary, received them with the specific warmth of people who have been tenants on land for 3 generations and who understand the difference between a landlord who knows their names and one who does not. Mrs. Henderson served tea and a question, whether the drainage situation on the North Channel had been reviewed recently. It had not. Marguerite made a note. On the drive back from the 3rd day's visits, Aldric said, "You knew about the north drainage situation." "I suspected it," she said. "The accounts showed a yield reduction that wasn't explained by weather or crop choice. The most likely explanation was drainage. I didn't know specifically until Mrs. Henderson confirmed it." "How do you know to look for yield reductions in the accounts?" he said. "My father," she said. "He taught me that the number is always a symptom. The question is always what the number is a symptom of." He was quiet for a moment. "I did not have this education," he said. "No," she agreed. "You had the education appropriate to a duke, which is the education of someone who is taught how to receive accounts rather than how to read them." "There's a difference?" "Considerable," she said. He looked at the road. "Would you teach me?" he said. She looked at him. It was not what she had expected him to say, which was itself information. "Yes," she said. "We can start with the accounts from the past 4 years. There's a pattern in the East Farm yields that I've been tracking and which I think you'll find interesting once you can see what to look for." "When?" "Tomorrow morning," she said, "if you're available at 8. "I'm available at 8, he said. They started at 8 the following morning. In September, the East Drainage Channel maintenance was completed, on schedule and within the budget that the April review had established, which was what happened when a plan was made by people who understood the situation and implemented by people who had been given clear direction. The yield improvement in the autumn harvest was not dramatic. It would take 2 or 3 years for the full effect to be visible, but the preliminary numbers were in the right direction. Marguerite noted them in the estate accounts with the specific, focused satisfaction of a woman who has been tracking a problem for 3 years and is watching its solution begin to appear in the data. In October, there was a letter from a property agency in Somerset. Marguerite opened it at the morning room desk. Mr. Arthur Voss of Bristol, the letter said, had encountered financial difficulties of his own and was proposing to sell Thornfield House. The agency was contacting families with historical connections to the property to determine whether there was interest before a general listing. She read the letter twice. She put it on the desk. She looked out the morning room window at the October estate, the trees past their colour, the fields in the specific bare quality of English autumn that showed what was structural rather than seasonal. She picked up her pen. She wrote to the property agency. She wrote to Webb. She wrote to her father. In December, Thornfield House came back. Not back to the Pemberton estate, to the Cavendish family trust, which purchased it through Ashwood Holdings at a price that was below the compensation Aldric had paid her for its loss, because Mr. Voss's financial difficulties had made him a motivated seller, and motivated sellers accepted reasonable prices. She went to see it in January. She went alone, which was the right way to go. Some things required the company of the person you were going to see them for, and some things required being the only person in the room. The east sitting room was as she remembered it. The window seat, the morning light, the rose garden visible below, overgrown in the way of gardens that have been without consistent attention for a season. She stood at the window for a long time. She thought about her mother. She thought about the specific quality of the light in August in this room, which was the light her mother had died in, which was the right light for a person who had lived well to die in. She thought about October of last year, when the letter from the property agency had arrived, and the morning room desk at Pemberton Hall, and the decision that had taken approximately 30 seconds to make. She thought about the day in her father's office on Threadneedle Street, when she had said, "Today," and what today had produced. She thought about the North Farm families and the East Drainage Channel, and the quarterly review meetings and the 8 o'clock sessions with the estate accounts, which had become a regular fixture, a shared project between 2 people who had discovered that working together was both more effective and more honest than working separately. She thought about Aldric, who had learned to read accounts rather than just receive them, and who had developed across the past year a quality she had not seen in him before. The quality of someone who was genuinely curious about the systems he was in charge of, rather than simply confident about managing them. The curiosity had produced changes. The changes had produced better numbers. The better numbers had produced a more stable financial position than the Pemberton estate had had in a decade. She also thought about the conversation she still owed herself about Thornfield, The full accounting of what it had meant that it had been sold, and what it meant that she had brought it back, and what the difference between those two moments said about where she had been and where she was now. She thought about all of this for a long time, standing at the east sitting-room window with the January light on the overgrown rose garden. Then she went downstairs to speak to the property agency's representative about the restoration schedule. The roses would need the most attention. She had always been willing to give roses the attention they required. In March, she brought Aldric to Thornfield. She showed him the east sitting-room window and the light and the rose garden, which had been through its first restoration phase, the overgrowth cleared, the structural canes assessed, the damaged plants removed and replacements ordered from the grower her mother had used. She told him about her mother. Not the public version, the version that appeared in the social accounts of who Marguerite Cavendish was and where she had come from. The actual version. The person her mother had been, the quality of her attention and her humour and her specific way of managing difficult situations, which was to sit with them until they resolved themselves or until she understood them well enough to resolve them herself, whichever came first. Aldric listened in the way he had learned to listen, with the full, organised attention of someone who understood that the thing being said was the thing that mattered and who was interested in it. When she finished, he said, "She sounds like someone I would have liked to know." "You would have," she said. "She would have found you infuriating and interesting in approximately equal parts, which was her standard assessment of most people worth knowing." "Infuriating because?" "Because you sold her house," she said. "And interesting because you understood, eventually, why it was wrong." He was quiet. "I'm going to plant the roses she had," she said, "the variety she grew in the south corner, the ones she brought from her own mother's garden. They take 2 or 3 years to establish fully, but by the time they're established, they're exactly right for this wall and this light." "I'll help," he said. She looked at him. "You know about roses?" she said. "No," he said, "but you said they take 2 or 3 years to establish. I'd like to be here for that." She looked at the winter rose garden, the cleared structure of it, the potential of it, the specific quality of a thing that had been through difficulty and had been given the attention it needed to begin again. "Then come in April when we plant," she said. "Bring old clothes." "Old clothes," he said. "Rose planting is not a drawing room activity," she said. He came in April. He brought old clothes. He was not skilled at rose planting, this was apparent within the first hour, but he was willing, which Marguerite had always found to be the more important quality, and he asked questions rather than assuming, which was the quality she had been watching for across the past year and which had been developing consistently. Mrs. Aldrid's daughter, who had taken over the Thornfield household management from her retired mother, worked beside them with the patient, organised attention of a woman who has been doing this kind of work for 20 years, and who understood that the people beside her were learning rather than incompetent, which was a different kind of patience and one worth having. By noon, the south corner was planted. By 4 o'clock, the east wall section was done. By the time the April light had gone soft and golden in the way of April light that has decided to be generous, they were finished. Marguerite stood back and looked at what had been planted. The roses were not yet anything. They were canes in prepared earth, the beginning of something rather than the thing itself. 2 or 3 years, as she had said. "They don't look like much," Aldric said. "They will," she said. "You're certain?" "My mother planted this variety in this spot 40 years ago," she said. "She chose the spot for the wall and the light and the morning warmth. The same conditions are there now. Given the right conditions and the time they need, they become exactly what they were meant to be." He looked at the planted section. "Like most things," he said. "Like most things," she agreed. They went inside for tea, which Mrs. Aldrid's daughter had ready because she had been watching the light and knew when 4 o'clock was approaching and what 4 o'clock in April required. The tea was good. The house was warm. Outside, the Thornfield rose garden held its beginning.